This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 209.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I feel like I've said that for almost 209 episodes, but it is what it is. That's how I start my shows, and I'm digressing. I have a great guest today, Michael Slater. We don't talk a lot about channel sales engineering. We had Kyle MacArthur a while back who talked about being an SE, a channel SE, basically supporting the channels to sell to the customers. This time I'm talking to the head of sales. By the time when I booked him, he was the head of pre-sales, but by the time I talked to him, he was the head of sales of a reseller or a channel sales. Basically, they work with their own clients, could be Microsoft, Azure, could be Google, could be AWS, whatever they are, and they sell to other channels. So they're kind of a channel. They're in the middle, who then sell to customers. And we dig into channel sales and how it works and some of my misconceptions about sales and sales through channels and how it works and why channels would want to sell, why wouldn't they want to sell. So we talk about all that. This was a great conversation with Michael. Let's jump into the show and see what he has to say. Mr. Slater, how you doing?
Pretty good, Ramsey. How about yourself?
I am jealous because you told me you're somewhere warm. And it's been
Correct.
cool. You're Canadian from Ottawa, and
yes.
you just escaped. And I'm gonna have
I escaped, yeah.
Maybe this will be the topic of the podcast, and who cares about sales engineering, but the topic should be how people in cold weather can escape to warmer weather.
How to negotiate a great job offer, I think would be a good title.
Yeah, all right, let's go. How did you, so maybe before we get there, I'm getting overexcited. Who are you? Maybe start with that.
Awesome. So I'm Mike Slater. Up until recently, I was the director of pre-sales and partner enablement, and now I am the head of sales actually at Sherwob for the channel marketplace. So we are a Microsoft partner, one of the biggest ones in Canada, and my main focus is channel strategy and channel enablement for pre-sales and the total sales team. So I'm one of the few that goes from a pre-sales background to become the head of sales. Usually it's the other direction when it comes to sales leadership. So I bring an interesting mix of both of the role.
Nice. How did you negotiate a good contract that will allow you to go away from Canada during the winter?
Well, I can't give away all my secrets. I'll give you the ones that are relevant. What it comes down to is prove yourself in remote situations, right? Historically speaking, and also work for an IT company. So those are my two steps to success. That's really it. Unfortunately, it isn't too much more than that. I just got lucky, and when they renegotiated my job offer, I was very specific about my requirements when I took the new role. That would include a agreement to remote working. So like I said, just forethought and foreplanning, right? That's how everything works. So are you going to have to travel to Canada to meet you with your teams and customers and all that right now, or you can do everything remote? No, because of the... Yeah, correct, Ramsey. It's a great question, but because of the current situation, the challenges we have in the pandemic, we're not seeing anybody anymore, really. We did have a quick reprieve before Omicron where we were on the road, so it was great. I was visiting customers, I was presenting, and I was doing what I love to do, right, which is be in front of the customer and explaining how technology works. So I was blessed to have that. I did have a good 4-month run between August and kind of late December, but with Omicron, I think that's all kind of going away. So unfortunately, there probably won't be too much more travel in the immediate future. Okay. And how did you make the decision to go from head of pre-sales to head of sales? I mean, generally speaking, people want to be in sales. They would have moved early on in their career from pre-sales to sales. You kind of went all the way up and then just did a big shift to the left, to the dark side. Well, I think it's a great question. I think that in my particular case, and I think what makes the case is the whole tech sales movement. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before, right? So the tech sales movement, at least the way that I look at it, what makes it really interesting is there was this kind of stuff where salespeople were salespeople and technology people were technology people, right? And they're kind of in separate lanes.
Yep.
So what I think is kind of happened, especially because of how accessible technology is. I mean, I don't know about you, but it's just, I've always loved technology since a young age, right? I've been building computers since I was about 9 or 10. So it's always been an interesting thing to me. But I'm also very chatty and I love talking to people, right? So naturally, I've always had predisposition to being an extrovert, which are the qualities you traditionally look for in a salesperson, right? Confidence, the ability to talk to strangers, and not be shy in social situations, right? Which, you know, sales requires to an extent as well too. So I think in my case, you know, I also laid it back and forth. I started my career in a very technical way, right? I did support at Ericsson and I answered tickets and I was involved. But I always tell, there's always a funny story I like to do to reflect on how I got here, is that I remember I had a meeting with one of my managers and the manager was very honest with me. He said, Mike, you're a terrible engineer. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm a terrible engineer? He's like, well, it's like, you know, I know you avoid doing tickets. We give you KPIs, because at the time it was, you know, you have to open and close, open and close, open and close, right? Keep the numbers up. But I was keeping tickets open to be nice to the customer, and I was taking my time, you know what I mean? And I really try to build a relationship with our clients, right? That was my thing. So when they call us, they'd be a little bit nicer and they'd have a better experience, right? This is a long time ago, right? This is 12 years ago, before CX was what it is today. And you know, I also time says, but you know what? You're great with the customer. Like, you do these great things. It's like, have you ever thought about going into sales and becoming like a sales engineer maybe? And at first I'm like, oh, sales is dirty. I would never do sales. That was kind of my, I know, irony. Head of sales now says this, right?
Yep.
And then what happened is eventually that position got canceled and the whole department got laid off. So I had to go find another role. And I took his advice because I did think about it. It resonated with me. And I took a sales role just to try it out, right? I said if I'd like it. And, you know, truth be told, I was an awful salesperson at the start. But I sold the technology that was similar to what I worked on. So my way of getting in front of the customers from a sales point of view is, hey, if you buy it from me, I will tell you and help you with the support aspect if something doesn't work.
Yeah. So
what I did was I said you could bypass the support questions and I'll help you figure out what's wrong. So it was just similar enough for me to understand the technology so I could point them in the right direction. And they bought from me because of this expertise. So I was accidentally a sales engineer for the first company I was hired for. So other reps would basically go in and be like, hey, Mike knows a lot about how the stuff works. If we just give him the customers, he can just go and have the conversation. And, you know, me being naive and be like, oh yeah, I'll talk to your customers for you. I don't have to make money. You know, that was kind of my first couple of years of sales. And you know, it's kind of funny, as I grew and I developed and I changed companies, this became a skill set. So what I've always kind of done is I had to do sales calls and I built up that sales base, the ability to talk to people. And then truth be told, I spend my time doing both. And I think with the tech sales revolution, and there's a book I like a lot by a guy named Daniel Pink called To Sell is Human. And one of his things is that everybody in an organization is responsible for sales. And I do agree with that. You know, if you're the CEO, you sell. If you're the CEO, you sell. Ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody has to sell the company they work for. Because if you don't buy into it and believe in it, you can't do your job correctly. So that's kind of how I got into that path. So, and you know, where I am right now, they love the work I do. They like the enablement engine I built for channel partners. So they said, hey, you could just be in charge of the whole thing and let us know how it goes. So I accepted the position about 2 months ago and I've been working on it since. It's interesting. It's a mix of both things I love. I still have my pre-sales team, but now I have a business development team as well too, which is interesting. And I like that as well.
So here's the thing that popped in my mind, that like when we go to university and we study engineering, we're thinking we're going to be like fixing problems or creating some new technology or whatever.
Yes.
And then we actually go into the workplace, and you were called a bad engineer, not because you were bad at engineering stuff or fixing problems or whatever, just because you were bad at closing tickets really quickly and meeting the KPI, which no one talks about as we're studying university. Like, who knew that the English language, like I never wanted to study English. Like, oh, now I have to go study on how to write an essay. And I write essays every day in terms of like sending emails to my customers and giving them information. All that is important and no one talks about. So it's interesting how that translates into, oh, you're a bad engineer because you're not closing tickets. Everything else I loved, basically. Like you kind of learned on the job and you solved problems, and you were an SE, but carrying I guess, quota. Which was
which is hilarious. Now in hindsight, I laugh at some of those guys, and like there was one guy in particular that really used to abuse me. Now that like I think about that, and like this guy was making all kinds of money because he had a great market, But he was completely a sales guy. Like he had no idea. He could barely get his phone to work, right?
Yeah.
So, it was always he put the phone down and be like, "Hey, Mike, if I wanted to do this, how would I do this?" And he'd be like, "Oh, that's too hard to explain. Can you just write me an email and tell me how you would do that?" Like things you realize now. Also working in a small organization at the time, was a small little distributor, kind of didn't realize it. And another reason why I think it works in my case for what I do is my kept to customers. So in the channel, which is the topic I think we want to ultimately discuss today, the buyers are a little bit different. So when you're in a channel environment, you're not selling to procurement usually. You're selling to a guy that owns a technology company or is the guy with authority or girl with authority in a technology company themselves. So like you're not really explaining to somebody who's looking for the best value. You're looking at somebody that's looking for the best solution. So even if you are in sales, right, you're probably talking to a CTO, and then you're probably talking to an IT team, and you're probably talking to other pre-sales engineers. So if you don't have a solid grasp of the technology that you're having a conversation with, it's not the same, right? Because these guys aren't necessarily looking to solve business problems. They solve business problems on behalf of their customers. What they're looking for is a technology partner, and that's a completely different conversation. So that's where SCs are twice as valuable, and almost all the salespeople have to understand how the technology works.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point. So I'm a hybrid in my role. I'm a sales engineer and a salesperson. And initially, I had one account which I took care of, and I was very good. I could do everything. And then they started being, "Oh, Ramsey, you're doing great. Add that. So here, let me add these 3 more accounts. Let me add these 5 more accounts." And now I have a big territory. And because of that, I've been kind of pushed out of sales engineering. And I like to call myself a hybrid, but I know the reality is I'm more sales now than sales engineer. I understand the technology.
Yes.
So how do you balance that line of being technically like being a salesperson or being an SE and still doing the sales stuff, or being a salesperson still doing the technology stuff?
That's a great question. And I think it really is truly difficult. I think it's truly hard to balance both these things together because I feel like they're kind of almost two different motions, right? Because when you're on a quota and you're on a plan, right? You're very, very motivated on a month-to-month or quarter-to-quarter basis, right? You know what I mean? And a sales engineer, typically speaking, is more motivated from like a project-to-project basis, right? Usually they communicate with customer success, and they have an entire structure which is more predicated either around performance of a product line, potentially, performance of a specific team with multiple components. But like there is sort of a de-stressing of individual people, right? I mean, we always talk about the ratios, right? And what we do. What's your AE to SE ratio? Is it 4-to-1? Is it 5-to-1? Is it 10-to-1? But that's what happens when you're the 1-to-1 now, right? You're the one that's responsible. So I think that's the most difficult mindset to get into, is that, it's balancing that sense of urgency. And I think that there are a lot of really great sales engineers, and myself included, that struggle with urgency, right? You need to create that desire to buy. And I think the best salespeople I meet have that, right? They can convince the customer that like everything you do is time sensitive, which it is. I mean, time's a resource we can't buy back, so to waste it is done. But I think that that's something naturally SEs don't have, right? Because SEs are more concerned about the final product, right?
Yeah.
It's not just the end destination, it's the entire journey. And then salespeople are very much about how do we get to this destination, right? They guide people down a path, a procurement, right? And then a sales engineer is really about the total customer experience and transitioning the value that we iterate in a demo or in discovery and translate into a final product that really hits the mark for what the customer needs. So I think that's one of the hardest parts to balance, I think, really is that sense of urgency.
Well, that's something I struggled with for a long time, where like I was working with my salesperson and he wants to bring in the deal this quarter. And I'm like, but why? They're going to buy next quarter, and we don't have to give them this massive discount to get in this quarter and actually give us time to provide a proper solution. But I never understood, like they're under so much pressure to hit their quota or get something done this month. So there's always like, and as a salesperson, I still want to think like a sales engineer. Like I don't want to give that discount. I'd rather not hit my quota this month and then hit it next month just because I'll get more out of it, which is not necessarily a good way of thinking about it from management perspective. So yeah, how but beyond just that, timing wise, how do you keep up with technology if you're out there talking to customers all the time about selling and the procurement and that sort of thing? Because it's different focus. How do you maintain both?
I mean, I think it's trying, in my case, to find avenues to do both things, right? So for example, like I'm a big fan, because again, I'm in a leadership position, right? So what I like to do is I like to co-sell, and I co-sell with both sides of my team. So, it's not common for me to jump on calls. So I recently, where I currently work, I did have a call where I explained the entire pre-sales process in depth to a potential client, right? What we look for, how we understand your needs, and we kind of communicate the entire detail, right? And to do that, I had to refresh myself on some of the things that we're doing. So like just by that little act of me getting involved in doing the day-to-day, I learned the technology. I jump on the calls with my engineers. So I'm not a security expert, but I do employ security experts on my team. So like even up to date by working with them on their calls. So I join them on a call and I always learn something every time I'm with them, right? So this does, three things for me. The first thing it does, it lets me do QA on my team. So see how they're doing. Because again, demo quality is always a concern, right? Because a bad demo is really, really hurts the sales process. So I want to make sure the quality is always kept at a certain level. I join it, I listen, right? It's tempting to just start answering emails and take a couple of Teams messages, right? But you don't do that. You focus on what you're doing and you just really pay attention to what staff is doing. That's a great way to learn and continually advance. The other thing is conferences where you can do both. So if there's a conference where you can network, right, and learn stuff at the same time, that's a great thing to do. So for me, I'm a big advocate of that in normal times, even if it's a digital conference. I recently went to one for Google, right? Google had one for their partner network, right? So I learned a lot during the day. I learned about new technology they're going to offer, the direction of some of their programs. It really helped me kind of get a keen idea of how their stuff works. So from that point of view, I really thought it was very interesting. And again, it's in real life, maybe I run to a potential client, right? A partner that's looking for someone to work with. So it's good to kind of maybe multitask where you can. Because I know how hard it is to find time in the day. I mean, I have 2 certs I've been trying to take now for 6 months that I just can't find an hour to sit down and do the coursework for. So I know how difficult it is, but if you can't do it in a dedicated fashion, at least find things you can multitask and do both at the same time.
Yeah. And in terms of your SEs that you're working with that work for you today, is there a plan to kind of combine the role of sales and sales engineering into one hybrid role and just send them out and do your thing? Or where do you see the future?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to be happening, right? Just because again, technology. I mean, the pace of technology we're adding is incredible. I mean, if you look at what I saw this graph and I can't remember, so like you'll have to throw it in the notes of the show. But somebody had I saw an ad somewhere that said, like 5-6 years ago, the average company had like 10 SaaS applications they were using, right? And then now 6-7 years later, it's like 100, right, for these companies. So as like technology usage kind of explodes, right? What that means for us is that we need to talk to more people and higher volume and higher stuff. And what's going to happen is traditional salespeople, right, that just do sales are really only a luxury enterprise companies can afford, right? Because enterprise company will buy a high-end sales guy with a lot of experience, right? That's going to command a tremendously high OTE, right? Because on target, these guys are wanting. I mean, if you look at RepView, right, which is a great way to see what tech sales people are being paid, they're commanding, in some cases, $500,000 a year, right, in compensation. So like the enterprise guys are getting the best of the best, right? And that's just a pure salesperson. They're also getting the best engineers, right? Guys at Google, they're hiring the best talent you can get. So you're kind of in this world where they can afford to spend enough money to do both. So they can spend $500,000 a year on the headcount for sales, $500,000 a year on the headcount for SE, if not more, right? And they can produce a product. But what about the other companies, right? The other millions of companies in the world that sell the SaaS solutions, right? That if you go back to the example I said earlier, if the average is 110 applications, maybe 20 of those are enterprise. What about the other 80 that aren't, right? Yeah. Who sells those? Well, the answer is it's going to be the sales engineers, right? Or the tech sales folks, that middle piece, which I think is the newest generation I see up and coming. Especially because now we have Gen Z that have grown up exposed to technology, that understand how these things work, and natively. Like I'm sure I know about you, if you have any younger cousins or people that have kids now, you see, or you kids yourself, you see these kids that know how to control an iPad, right? My mom still struggles with hers sometimes, right? And it's not that she doesn't know anything. It's not that she's not intelligent. It's just that she didn't grow up using the technology. My mom's one of the smartest people I've ever met, but it doesn't mean that she knows how this stuff works. But these kids grow up with it. So I feel like what's going to happen now is that these tech sales roles mix both together. And we're going to end up having this new generation of sales reps, the ones that are in their 20s right now, that are going to be doing both. They'll be selling the technology and they'll be doing their own pre-sales work. And I feel like that's where we're going into.
It's interesting you say that. I heard a podcast where a gentleman was talking about Kasparov, the tennis champion, and there's a
Yes.
new champion by Magnus something, and they asked Kasparov, "Would you be able to beat uh, Magnus, or I can't remember his name, the new champion?" And he's like, "No, I can't,
Sure.
because right now, like, I wrote a book about the things that I faced, and all that person had to do was read the book, and he learned everything that I learned in 10 years in 5 minutes." And like, that's what we're talking about. Like, my children, your mother doesn't know how to use a tablet. My mother struggles too, and my children are just playing
Yeah.
with it as if it's like as if they were born with it.
Nothing.
And right now,
Yeah.
like, same thing with Gen Z, where they're gonna grow and they already know how to use the technology. Now you just have to teach them how to sell it, which is a great point. And you're currently, like, not currently, you sell exclusively for one company. You're a channel partner for one company, right?
Well, for us, we actually sell a mix of products.
Okay.
Like Microsoft is a major partner of ours, but we also do other things, right? Like we do Google, we do security around the entire product of ecosphere. We do IaaS, and we do many different things. But our main business is channel partners, right? That's what we are. We're what you call a channel first company. So our main goal is to kind of attract and retain channel partners, and that's my obsession, right? Is how do we appeal to these technology resellers, right? It's people that resell technology. And again, very different motion from traditional SE work, which is usually like, how do I convince procurement to buy my product, right? How do I convince IT department to buy my product? It's a slightly different motion than what I would say traditional SEs do.
Okay,
So it's
to clarify, because I might be missing something. You are a partner for
Sure.
big companies like Microsoft and all that, and then you're going out there trying to find other partners, channel partners, to sell to the end customer. Did I understand that right, or how is that right?
No, so the way that our customer works, or the way that we deal with people, is that vendors deal with a company like a Sherwob, right? This is called distribution. So we go and we take all these different places and we build basically a marketplace. And then a partner comes in, a much smaller company will come in, let's say it's 100 employees, 50 employees, 20 employees, and they buy their technology from us and we help them set it up. So we set these customers up for success, right? So we help them design and build the solutions, but they sell it through us rather than just them by themselves, right? Because like, let's take Microsoft as an example, really big company, scaling a lot, right? Teams has become one of the most popular products in the market right now.
Yep.
So how do they scale out and reach all these SMBs, right? Because again, there's a lot of companies that aren't technology savvy out there. So how do they scale that? Well, they bring on channel partners to do it. They bring on managed service providers, IT companies, IT consultants, and those are my customers. Those are the people that I deal with.
Okay, so you're not working with the end customer. You're working with a channel partner who then sells to the end customer, and also you work with, like, you're kind of the midpoint or the liaison between the big companies like Microsoft and the smaller channel partners.
100%. That's exactly what we are.
All right. So what are some of the challenges that you face in, like, because I love working with end users, because I get to understand their problems, I get to solve their problems, and I sell it to them directly. What are the problems you're solving for the channel partners, I guess?
One of the biggest things I'm doing is I'm helping them build a business around the technology, right? So if I take a look at a channel partner, or really kind of any kind of small MSP or IT shop or consultancy, right? Is that what they're trying to do is they're having the challenge we talked about, right? Which is, how do you keep up, right? How do you keep on adding new technologies? How do you keep on growing? The pandemic definitely increased the difficulty and also the amount of technology available and the reliance on it, right? So you take a company like this and they say, okay, so Microsoft, Google, Bitdefender, Proofpoint, Acronis, all these big companies are selling these big products that do these amazing things for enterprise companies. How do I democratize that technology and get it to my end users, right? So if you go and you talk to a Google or you talk to one of these bigger companies, they don't have the scale for you, right? They're busy with the Fortune 500 guys that pay most of their bills, right?
Yep.
Again, they need to work with. But then the question is, right, from my point of view, even if they want the technology, I'm thinking about how do I enable them on it, right? So my day-to-day, and what I'm really more concerned with is, how do I get technology partners activated, and how do I teach them how to use the product? How do I integrate in their current technology stack, and how do I show them the value? How do I teach their sales engineers to sell to end users, right? So it's almost like in my case, I not only do I have to train the partner to do it, I have to train the partner to have that conversation, right? To understand the business problems. So let's say, for example, Ramsey, very practical application for you. You talk to a partner, or in your case, well, you talk to a client, and the client says, hey, Ramsey, here's this great product. This is your biggest account you have. And they say, I need you to do this technology for me in the next 6 months, or I'm going to pick another provider because the other provider that's talking to me does everything you do, plus this one thing that you're missing. How do you get ready for that? How do you onboard that in your thing? Well, you have to talk to somebody like us, right? So that's really what I'm more preoccupied with. And that's a reality of many of our customers, right? Is that the immense amount of digital transformation, right? Again, years and years of digital transformation taking over the place of 2 months. I'd say we've done 10 years into the future in about 24 months of real time because of what's happened. So you need to make sure that these companies are up to date and these guys are stacked up. So that's honestly what most of my day-to-day is, right? How do I get them set up for success? How do I get them able to scale? How do I get them to understand the technology? And how does their team, both sales and pre-sales, position these products to their customers?
Are you doing that yourself, or is your sales engineering team doing that for them?
It's interesting because it really is a mix. So in some cases, with some types of partners, we're in the background, right? So we're like a support infrastructure. In some cases, we're in front of the customer doing it ourselves. So that's kind of the interesting part about us is that we're experts in the product from exposure. So where a normal company would maybe only get 1 or 2 opportunities in a product per year, right? Because again, there's so many different products out there that can do stuff. Because of scale, we're doing 10 opportunities, 20 opportunities a week, right? Of this particular nature that some of these companies would only get once every year. So we're providing that expertise that we build up, both dealing with end users and dealing with the partners and applying it to our entire channel, right? So we're battle tested, which is what I'd say is one of the biggest differences between us and our competitors or the other people in our space that do what we do.
Oh man, so many questions. I don't know where to start right now.
No, it's an interesting field, and
yeah, it's different. I mean, we work with distribution channels who then work with the channel partners, but from my experience, I haven't seen them do anything. Right? They're more just like they ask us for a quote and we send a quote, and there's the end of that. So I haven't looking at the way you're working, where you're actually kind of an advisor for both the channel partners that you work with and the customers. It's different than what my experience has been. And the fact that you also sell multiple products that could be competing, right? You mentioned Microsoft, but you also mentioned
Correct.
Google. How do you make the decision of which one to choose without hurting your relationship with those big organizations that may say, like, you're not selling enough for us, you're selling for the competitors, I'm going to take away your ability to sell and just give it to somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, so to answer that question, I think that most competitors and I think that most vendors understand, especially in our space, that not one product is going to be a fit for every single customer, right? So the first part of that thing I'll address is how do we pick what we do? So we pick what we do based off, I'd say, 3 factors. The first factor is, what does the partner need, right? So every partner is different. They have different things that they're good at. They have different business goals, and they have different verticals that they deal with, right? So for example, you could have a partner that's in the healthcare vertical, and they're really, really concerned with products that have HIPAA compliance, right? Products that cater to vertical, built-in tools that help with, let's say it's a dental clinic, right? So things that can automate booking appointments, things that can automate procurement of medicine, things that can automate scheduling and shifting, right? So every single vertical has a preference, right? And that's one way that we kind of rule this out. The other thing we'll look at as well too is, what can the customer afford? What can the partner afford? What can their vertical afford? All technologies have different price points, right? So some technologies and some types of projects don't require them a Cadillac, right? When a really simple, 2001 Tercel from Honda might do the job, right? Depending on what you need, depending on what the budget of the customer is. And that's a great factor, right? Because not all budgets are made the same. If you deal with a nonprofit, they're not going to have the money a Fortune 500 company will have. So they're going to need to not necessarily cut corners, but be conscious of the price they're paying for each product that they buy, right? So that's the benefit of having multiple things in the stack, is that you can use it that way. And the other aspect that I would say as well too, and lastly, is what the customer wants to buy. So customers have preferences, right? So, a great example of, let's say, a competitor like, so I'm not gonna get too specifics, obviously, because I can't talk about
Yeah,
industry in both. I don't have to be fair to everybody. But let's say, for example, you have a company that's used to a specific kind of interface, right? So it would be such an ordeal to maybe change from one interface to another that whatever they buy in cloud, right, if they're going from something that's on premise, they want it to be similar to what they're currently using to adopt, right? So in that case, you need to have stuff that they have. And there's many different arguments about how many different providers achieve that, right? You know, someone could say, oh, I grew up using the retail version of this product, or, oh, I've used this particular client for email for 25 years. You know, there's many different reasons that lead consumers to this type of behavior. But that's the reason why we have to do it. And to answer the second part of your question, which is really a good one, is how do you keep them all happy, all these different vendors? Well, the thing is, number one, vendors usually have multiple distributors. So they're not the only one hedging their bets, right? They go work with different companies. I'd like to say that I'm the only one, and you know, every single person in the industry wants to be the exclusive provider. Like, no doubt, IBM wishes that it was the only person that would sell certain products for certain big vendors as part of their service offerings, but it can't be that way, right? Yep. All these different vendors, right? Because Microsoft is not a support company, right? Microsoft is a product company. They develop things for people to use. So like they're always going to need to have multiple different types of channel partners using multiple types of products. It just makes the most sense, right? So look at it that way. So because of that, they're going to be able to do it. And the other factor is, like, a lot of these vendors even understand that it's like, you know, they're not always going to get picked for every single project. They would like to be, but at the end of the day, as long as they feel that you are being fair to them, right? And that you're not cannibalizing their business, which is like one of the big things we don't do in the channel. Like I'm very careful about that. So if, you know, if we ever got a lead or we got a project for a particular manufacturer, I would honor the manufacturer's lead. So even if the customer was like, oh, hey, you know, you have XYZ product on the shelf, can we just maybe buy this other product too? I'd be like, no, sorry about that. Like, we're really gonna have to go and work on this because this is the direction that we're going into. So, you know, there's a lot of it is gentlemen's agreements, right? And codes of conduct and honor and contractual obligations. So it's definitely a balancing act, though, and it's definitely an interesting side of the industry that we work in.
I want to rephrase what you just said in my own words to make sure I understood what you just said. So let's say you come in with a lead for company A, and then they send you and you start talking to these people, and then all of a sudden in the meeting they say, actually, we'd rather company B. At this point, you'd say, no, we're going down the path of company A. Is that
correct?
Okay, yeah, okay. That's nice, because I've worked with some who just do this like switcheroo all of a sudden. It's like, oh, company B gives us a little bit more commission, so we're just gonna go with company B. I mean, they don't tell the customer that, but I've heard that.
They don't, I mean, yeah, but and the vendor realizes that though, right? Because, you know, smart vendors are tracking these things and they're aware of, like, hey, this big lead that I gave to you guys last month, what happened here, right? What went on? Where did it go to?
Yeah, I mean, we closed the deal, just not.
You know. Oh, exactly. You imagine exactly like that'd be tantamount to transgression. And the other thing that we do that's interesting too as well is we actually make our own IP wrapped around the things that these vendors do. So like there's some great things that we do even at Sherwob where we take, for example, Microsoft, right? And we have a lot of expertise in it. So for example, in our case, like we have this thing called Ops Protect. So we actually do tenant security for Windows 365. So we can plug it in. You can get live monitoring of all the events that happen, where users are logging in from. We even offer some managed security offerings around that. So we even do a little extra for our partners and incorporate based on technology they already buy, right? So what's great, that's the reason why, you know, you have to be different in this market. You have to create values. You have to design different things. And we're very much an innovation company too, which is another reason why I love working here.
Okay, well, I guess that could differentiate you from other companies where they just sell whatever Microsoft might have. They are just these are their products, buy it. You're actually doing something with that and providing extra value, which is I guess the right way to go. In terms of support,
correct, which is what you have to do.
Yeah, in terms of support, I worked for previously. I worked for companies where they went through a reseller, and just the support wasn't great because we'd have like something would happen. They'd go talk to the reseller, who would then talk to the company, and then just it takes more delay and more time. How do you manage that to make sure the customer is getting the best support they can possibly get, as if they were buying directly from the vendor, and make sure they continue to use your product and onboard them and make sure they're happy? It's a long question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And what it comes down to is that's why I think as somebody who does what we do, which you're focused on kind of cloud distribution and being a cloud marketplace, is that you need to focus on having support that specializes in the product lines that you do, right? Because you're right, that is a major issue and it happens all the time. So we definitely have some competitors that sell a billion different things. This probably is one of the ones you guys even dealt with in the past, because everybody deals with them. And what's hard with them is that they carry like 500 different vendors and like 20,000, 30,000 different products. So they can't support everything, right? And that's the nightmare scenario you talked about, right? Something actually breaks and goes wrong, right? Or you have a pre-sales question, right? Bring it back to what we do.
Yeah.
And like, so we need an answer. Like, can the product actually do this? The documentation isn't clear. I need to escalate this. Excuse me. How far up the ladder do I need to go to get this answer? And traditionally, in traditional ways distribution works, the answer is going to take 4 or 5 weeks, and it might not be right by the time you get it, and it's not going to be great. So it's great about a place like where we work from. And again, I'm not trying to make a promo video about the company, but I do think we do a good job at this, is that we support our stuff in-house, right? So we do the level 1 and 2 ourselves really quickly. And because again, the volume of requests, we support all these different companies, we get asked all these different questions all the time. The question is like, how do I use that? Well, I build scale, I build databases, right? So I can answer these questions. So I don't even need the vendor to answer some of these, right? We just know what the answer is. And let's say that we do even need to utilize the vendor. That's not a problem. We will actually pay for support, and we'll have a premium support package with some of these vendors so that our questions get answered way faster than if you went through an indirect service line.
Nice. Yeah, we've lost deals like in the previous company because there was a reseller in between, and it just takes either the reseller was busy doing something else, or it wasn't urgent, or it just took time for the question to go from the customer to the right point of contact. So it's interesting that you guys are finding workarounds for those. And I don't know, like I don't work with too many distribution companies, so I don't know what the general rule is there, but at least I'm finding it unique. So there you go. It's a compliment.
Well, we are very like in our case, like we're one of very few people that do what we do in the particular recipe that we have, right? And that's something that a lot of our vendors that we deal with even recognize, right? That it's always why they pick us, is because we're very agile, we're quick to respond to market, and we're very, very much about the customer experience, which is key right now, right? With traditional distribution, right, venues and reseller models don't really accommodate very well for, right? So I have a question for you, because you mentioned that you dealt with resellers. So what was your biggest challenge in dealing with the resellers? Like what do you think really held up sales and sales engineering for you?
Oh, they didn't do anything. They were just a channel. So I've worked with several. The worst ones were the ones who were just there to like take an order, or that's pretty much it. And that was a challenge. Like, why aren't you out there trying to sell the product? Well, because we have 7,000 other products and you're the smallest one, for example. Or that we just want to like pass information along. We don't want to do the work. That's the biggest struggle that I've had with resellers. And not all of them are like that, obviously. It's just the ones that we've worked with, that I've worked with, happen to be like that. I've worked with other ones who are great, who would go and find a deal, bring us in, follow up afterwards, continue work on it. So I have no problems with those. But or another one is like switching, like, oh, you don't want this one? How about this one that does exactly the same as that one, right? Switching companies, switching
That one, got it.
But yeah, that's
you know what? It's hard.
Yeah,
but I like those points, guy. I think you really did touch on like some of the more old school aspects of distribution, right? The kind of things that linger in the background. The unresponsiveness, the unwillingness to learn new products, right, and learn new processes, and that's really the hardest part. And I find that unless you build that enablement framework in the back to support the resellers, that is their default behavior, right?
Yeah. For me specifically, I was very new in my career as a sales engineer, and I didn't understand why they weren't out selling our product. I just thought it was their job. Turns out it's not their job. They're selling a million other products. Mine is a small portion of it, and I didn't give them enough information or the proper incentivization to go out and sell it. And it wasn't really my job as a sales engineer to do it. But if I knew then what I know now, I would definitely go about it differently and work with them to see like, hey, all right, what will it take for you to go out and sell my product? Right? There's a reason they weren't out there selling my product. It wasn't profitable enough for them, most likely. Like they could sell one Cisco router.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, what I kind of feel like it's something you touched on, which is really valid, is that I feel like it used to not be our problem, but now I think it is, because we're the only ones that can convince the partner to do it correctly, right? Because that's the issue. Because look at a salesperson, right? Salespeople aren't gonna, at least good salespeople aren't gonna quote stuff that they're not comfortable selling, right? So like, and who makes them comfortable? It's guys like me and you, Ramsey, that kind of do that. So I think that's something that like you did it and it was your natural inclination to do that, even if it wasn't your job, and it's the right one. And successful channel companies are the ones that do that today. And the ones that don't do that are the ones that are failing.
You can think about it this way too, like just a salesperson who's selling for his own company to a customer. He would rather sell the product that will get him closer to his or her quota than a product that's like will give him nothing in return, right? It's just more, it's a lot of effort to sell it, not enough quota relief, versus something that's easy to sell, high quota relief. Same thing with vendors and value-added resellers, distribute, whoever they are. They're thinking the same way. Like the way they're incentivized is the way they're going to work, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So this brings me to the next part of our interview, which I lovingly call the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I've asked almost every guest, and I would like to hear what you have to say about it. So, question number 1, and I think there's a lot of things that you might answer here, but what do you love about what you're doing today?
So what I love is, I think the impact I see in terms of not just my people, I think it's also in the customers. I think it's in terms of the change that we're making in the world, you know? When I look at what we've accomplished in the last 24 months, and I mean like through all the different channel partner programs I've worked through, right?
Yep.
You know, from Google to Microsofts to Proofpoint to Bitdefender, you know, just name a couple of them, of like the many I deal with. I think that we've really made lives the better. I think we've, so, you know, the bigger companies were already going to succeed, right? They're already going to do great. I mean, companies, their stock price has shot up in the last 24 months, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's really great is that us, through our channel, we've helped the small guys, right? We've helped the independent, smaller businesses that make up North America succeed and thrive and do better. So I think in many ways, I feel like we've democratized technology. And what we've done is, through my team, is we've made the world, and made businesses operate better and survive like a really tough time. So I think I take a lot of credit in that when I see a lot of our partners, a lot of our end users, and a lot of our clients thrive. It was otherwise been a very tough situation. And I take pride in that. I really do. And it gives me shivers right now just to even talk about it.
I can resonate with that. I know the feeling, but let's move on to the second question. You are in a position that you can make a lot of changes. What is one thing you see right now that needs to be changed about the sales engineering role?
I think that one of the things that needs to be kind of removed is, I think, the silo between sales and between sales engineering, right? Proper. I think that that's one of the biggest things. I think it is changing, but I think that there are many companies that are slow to adapt to this and that keep that wall between them. And I think it hurts both people. So what I really like to see is leaders, you know, people in positions of power and authority, really doing things together. Bring your pre-sales team to your SKO this year, right? Get them involved, make them feel the energy, invest time into them, have them show up, you know, listen to their feedback. Have them join your sales committee, right? If you have a committee, some companies have a sales org where different people come and talk about challenges, invite your pre-sales people, include them in spiffs, right? Make the team work better together. Don't keep them separate on their different islands. It might work better logistically, when it comes to the morale and the team building and the teamwork we have to make, especially as these roles shrink and blend together in new and interesting ways, we got to kind of keep them together, and we got to break down those barriers.
I like that. All right. Question number 3. What resource, whether it's book, online, audio, whatever, what resource do you recommend for your SEs to listen, read, etc., absorb? Let's just take absorb.
To absorb. I mean, I'm a big fan, I would say, a lot of the things you can find on Udemy and sort of these online 2.0 courses. I mean, because books were great back when you could buy them, right? I mean, the joke I always make is, if you go to the technical section of a bookstore, right, it used to be, you know, 10 years ago, like 10, 12 shelves, right? You go there right now, it's a narrow shelf between, you know, adult paranormal romance and, you know, some other book section, right? So it's just, you get this one little shelf that has that. So, because again, everything's moved online. Now you can learn the vendor specific things if you wanted, right? But the problem is that vendors always talk in terms of their ecosphere. So if you really want to get what I call domain knowledge, which I think pre-sales people have to get, I always recommend things like Udemy or any of those other kind of course libraries to find stuff that's specific to a general sales engineering role or technology that is domain specific. Because domain knowledge not only increases your value on the market, it makes it better for you to talk to customers. If you're an expert in this one particular product, that's great. But what's going to happen when you're on a call with the customer and they say, hey, how are you different than product Y if you're product X? And without the domain knowledge, you can't answer that question. So you're not effective a resource without that knowledge. So that's the reason why I say, go find the place that have domain knowledge, because that is your most valuable asset as an SC that builds over time and will never diminish.
Nice. All right, last question of the not so fire round. Is there a habit you're working on today to improve either in your personal or professional life?
I'd say one of the biggest things is being easier on yourself. I think that's something that I'm trying to work on, and kind of forgiving yourself a little bit for the stuff that you made in the past, the mistakes you made, and kind of like, you know, where you feel like you should be. I feel like we live in a time where we see the success of others so steadily, you know what I mean? Especially because, you know, from the pandemic, there's been some winners and there's been some losers. I feel that socially, I feel that professionally, I feel that everywhere around. And I think you don't need to hold yourself to the highest standard possible, and understand that you're human, and understand that we're all living through a tremendous time that we're in. And so practicing some self-care and taking the time to understand that everything you do is perfect and that we can all be nice to each other will lead to better results overall. And that really is something I think that I'm trying to work on myself, is not holding myself to the highest standard possible and allowing for me to make mistakes, and forgiving myself for it, forgiving my team when they make mistakes, forgiving everybody in our ecosystem for doing that, right? Because no one's perfect. And I think that especially given the situation we're living in right now, in the current pandemic, we need to be a lot nicer to ourselves. And that's something I'm trying to practice right now.
Nice. All right, as we're drawing to a close for this interview, 2 questions. Let's start with the first one, obviously. Is there a question you hoped I was going to ask you, which I didn't today?
No, I mean, it's great. I always love having these with knowledgeable people in the space, especially somebody, and this is something that I love talking with you, Ramsey, about specifically, is because there's people I talk to about what we do, and there's no other question, right? They just kind of get confused, and we have that kind of talk, but it's always like, you know, the next level, right? Which for you're well, how do vendors deal with you guys, right? How do you handle channel conflict? Like, that's the great natural question that you asked, right? So I'd say, like, you definitely answered a lot of the tough ones. You gave me a couple hard ones too. So, like, from a question point of view, very happy with this. This has been great.
Awesome. All right, any questions you have for me before we hang up?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm content with everything. Nothing specific. I guess I would ask you probably one thing now that I kind of think about it a little bit. In terms of, you know, your experience in the channel, like do you think that channel gets enough coverage right now? Like, do you think people are talking about it? Because I feel like a lot of the focus on what we do is really on the enterprise side of it, much like it is in sales, right? People always talk about big boy sales, right? They talk about the kind of enterprise account executives at like the top 20 companies. Do you feel like there's enough conversation around everyone else? Like, is this something that you're focusing on, that you're trying to do? Are you trying to find these other stories to talk about?
That's why you're here. There isn't enough, like, I didn't talk to many people about channel sales. It's only recently where I was coaching someone, and that person is a channel SE, and I realized I need to get a lot better in that area. So I started reaching out to people like yourself who are in channels, so I can learn a lot more. And I realized there's a lot that is different, and we need to have a lot more conversations. So yeah, no, I don't think it's talked about enough, and there's a lot of channel SEs out there that need to learn about it, and it's tough.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, last question of the day, Mike. If people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
I would say on LinkedIn. So you just look up Michael Slater. You can find me on there. If there's a drop here, just throw it in there so they can reach me. That's my best place. I do all my networking there. I love to connect. Talk about your channel, talk about some of the stuff you're facing. I always like to talk to my peers and prospective sales engineers. I mean, it's funny, I went to an event and I did actually talk about the channel transition for like an hour with an SC that was he was in enterprise, he's now in the channel, and struggled with it at a conference. And I love doing that. Like, you know, telling him, here's the stuff that I wish I'd done differently. Here's what I think works now for like how this stuff works. And having those conversations is great because it not only does it give me a chance to talk about the things I do, it also lets me revisit some of the things I've been doing historically and maybe do them better. So I'd love to have this conversation with anybody and talk about this topic or any other topic related to channel at all.
We'll leave a link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. Thank you, Mike, for coming on.
Awesome.
I really enjoyed this. This was fun.
Thanks, Ranjay. I appreciate you taking me on here and taking the time to talk about what I love to do.
My pleasure.
And that's the end of the show. Thank you, Michael, for coming on. This was a great conversation. We recorded it a while back and I just re-listened to it. I'm going to re-listen to it again. That's redundant. But yeah, this was a great conversation about the challenges of going through sales and where he sees sales engineering going in the future. So if you have any comments, any feedback, anything like that, please make sure to share that with me. Also, if you're looking for some additional coaching, I did have a soft launch of the SE hotline, which you can find at WeTheSalesEngineers.com. So if you're looking for additional help to improve your career, whether you're an aspiring SE, experienced SE, or anywhere in between, check it out. It might be useful for you. Hopefully I can help in any way, shape, or form. So let's just leave it at that. We'll see you next time. Peace. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.